Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Chapter 18. It was in the 4th year of my apprenticeship to Joe, and it was a Saturday night. There was a group assembled round the fire at the Three Jolly Bargemen, attentive to Mr. Wopsle as he read the newspaper aloud. Of that group I was one. A highly popular murder had been committed, and Mr. Wopsle was imbrued in blood to the eyebrows. He gloated over every abhorrent adjective in the description, and identified himself with every witness at the inquest. He faintly moaned, "I am done for," as the victim, and he barbarously bellowed, "I'll serve you out," as the murderer. He gave the medical testimony, in pointed imitation of our local practitioner, and he piped and shook, as the aged turnpike keeper who had heard blows, to an extent so very paralytic as to suggest a doubt regarding the mental competency of that witness. The coroner, in Mr. Wopsle's hands, became Timon of Athens, the beetle Coriolanus. He enjoyed himself thoroughly, and we all enjoyed ourselves, and were delightfully comfortable. In this cozy state of mind we came to the verdict willful murder then, and not sooner. I became aware of a strange gentleman leaning over the back of the settle opposite me, looking on. There was an expression of contempt on his face, and he bit the side of a great forefinger as he watched the group of faces. "Well," said the stranger to Mr. Wopsle, when the reading was done, "you have settled it all to your own satisfaction." "I have no doubt." Everybody started and looked up as if it were the murderer. He looked at everybody coldly and sarcastically. "Guilty, of course," said he. "Out with it." "Come, sir," returned Mr. Wopsle, "without having the honor of your acquaintance, I do say guilty." Upon this we all took courage to unite in a confirmatory murmur. "I know you do," said the stranger. "I knew you would. I told you so. But now I'll ask you a question. Do you know, or do you not know, that the law of England supposes every man to be innocent until he is proved to be guilty?" "Sir," Mr. Wopsle began to reply, "as an Englishman myself, Come," said the stranger, biting his forefinger at him. "Don't evade the question. Either you know it, or you don't know it. Which is it to be?" He stood with his head on one side and himself on one side in a bullying, interrogative manner, and he threw his forefinger at Mr. Wopsle, as it were to mark him out, before biting it again. "Now," said he, "do you know it, or don't you know it?" "Certainly I know it," replied Mr. Wopsle. "Certainly you know it. Then why didn't you say so at first? Now, I'll ask you another question," taking possession of Mr. Wopsle, as if he had a right to him. "Do you know that none of these witnesses have yet been cross-examined?" Mr. Wopsle was beginning, "I can only say," when the stranger stopped him. "What, you won't answer the question, yes or no? Now, I'll try you again," throwing his finger at him again. "Attend to me. Are you aware, or are you not aware, that none of these witnesses have yet been cross-examined? Come, I only want one word from you. Yes or no?" Mr. Wopsle hesitated, and we all began to conceive rather a poor opinion of him. "Come," said the stranger, "I'll help you. You don't deserve help, but I'll help you. Look at that paper you hold in your hand. What is it? What is it?" repeated Mr. Wopsle, eyeing it, much at a loss. "Is it?" pursued the stranger in his most sarcastic and suspicious manner. "The printed paper you have just been reading from." "Undoubtedly." "Undoubtedly. Now, turn to that paper, and tell me whether it distinctly states that the prisoner expressly said that his legal advisers instructed him altogether to reserve his defense." "I read that just now," Mr. Wopsle pleaded. "Never mind what you read just now, sir. I don't ask you what you read just now. You may read the Lord's Prayer backwards if you like, and perhaps have done it before today. Turn to the paper. No, my friend, not to the top of the column. You know better than that. To the bottom." We all began to think Mr. Wopsle full of subterfuge. "Well, have you found it?" "Here it is," said Mr. Wopsle. "Now follow that passage with your eye, and tell me whether it distinctly states that the prisoner expressly said that he was instructed by his legal advisers wholly to reserve his defense. Come, do you make that of it?" Mr. Wopsle answered, "Those are not the exact words." "Not the exact words, not the exact words," repeated the gentleman bitterly. "Is that the exact substance?" "Yes," said Mr. Wopsle. "Yes," repeated the stranger, looking round at the rest of the company with his right hand extended towards the witness Wopsle. "And now I ask you what you say to the conscience of that man who, with that passage before his eyes, can lay his head upon his pillow after having pronounced a fellow creature guilty. Unheard. We all began to suspect that Mr. Wopsle was not the man we had thought him, and that he was beginning to be found out. And that same man, remember, pursued the gentleman, throwing his finger at Mr. Wopsle heavily. That same man might be summoned as a juryman upon this very trial, and having thus deeply committed himself, might return to the bosom of his family and lay his head upon his pillow, after deliberately swearing that he would well and truly try the issue joined between our sovereign lord the king and the prisoner at the bar, and would a true verdict give according to the evidence, so help him God. We were all deeply persuaded that the unfortunate Wopsle had gone too far, and had better stop in his reckless career while there was yet time. The strange gentleman, with an air of authority not to be disputed, and with a manner expressive of knowing something secret about every one of us that would effectually do for each individual if he chose to disclose it, left the back of the settle and came into the space between the two settles in front of the fire, where he remained standing, his left hand in his pocket, and he biting the forefinger of his right. "From information I have received," said he, looking round at us as we all quailed before him, "I have reason to believe there is a blacksmith among you, by name Joseph or Joe Gargery, which is the man." "Here is the man," said Joe. The strange gentleman beckoned him out of his place, and Joe went. "You have an apprentice," pursued the stranger, "commonly known as Pip. Is he here?" "I am here," I cried. The stranger did not recognize me, but I recognized him as the gentleman I had met on the stairs, on the occasion of my second visit to Miss Havisham. I had known him the moment I saw him looking over the settle, and now that I stood confronting him with his hand upon my shoulder, I checked off again in detail his large head, his dark complexion, his deep-set eyes, his bushy black eyebrows, his large watch chain, his strong black dots of beard and whisker, and even the smell of scented soap on his great hand. "I wish to have a private conference with you two," said he, when he had surveyed me at his leisure. "It will take a little time. Perhaps we had better go to your place of residence. I prefer not to anticipate my communication here. You will impart as much or as little of it as you please to your friends afterwards. I have nothing to do with that." Amidst a wondering silence, we three walked out of the Jolly Bargeman, and in a wondering silence walked home. While going along, the strange gentleman occasionally looked at me, and occasionally bit the side of his finger. As we neared home, Joe, vaguely acknowledging the occasion as an impressive and ceremonious one, went on ahead to open the front door. Our conference was held in the state parlor, which was feebly lighted by one candle. It began with the strange gentleman sitting down at the table, drawing the candle to him and looking over some entries in his pocketbook. He then put up the pocketbook and set the candle a little aside, after peering round it into the darkness at Joe and me, to ascertain which was which. "My name," he said, "is Jaggers, and I am a lawyer in London. I am pretty well known. I have unusual business to transact with you, and I commence by explaining that it is not of my originating. If my advice had been asked, I should not have been here. It was not asked, and you see me here. What I have to do as the confidential agent of another, I do. No less, no more." Finding that he could not see us very well from where he sat, he got up and threw one leg over the back of a chair and leaned upon it, thus having one foot on the seat of the chair and one foot on the ground. "Now, Joseph Gargery, I am the bearer of an offer to relieve you of this young fellow, your apprentice. You would not object to cancel his indentures at his request and for his good. You would want nothing for so doing." "Lord forbid that I should want anything for not standing in Pip's way," said Joe, staring. "Lord forbidding is pious, but not to the purpose," returned Mr. Jaggers. "The question is, would you want anything? Do you want anything?" "The answer is," returned Joe sternly, "no." I thought Mr. Jaggers glanced at Joe, as if he considered him a fool for his disinterestedness, but I was too much bewildered between breathless curiosity and surprise to be sure of it. "Very well," said Mr. Jaggers. "Recollect the admission you have made, and don't try to go from it presently." "Who's going to try?" retorted Joe. "I don't say anybody is. Do you keep a dog?" "Yes, I do keep a dog." "Bear in mind, then, that Bragg is a good dog, but Holdfast is a better. Bear that in mind, will you?" repeated Mr. Jaggers, shutting his eyes and nodding his head at Joe, as if he were forgiving him something. "Now, I return to this young fellow, and the communication I have got to make is that he has great expectations." Joe and I gasped. and looked at one another. "I am instructed to communicate to him," said Mr. Jaggers, throwing his finger at me sideways, "that he will come into a handsome property. Further, that it is the desire of the present possessor of that property that he be immediately removed from his present sphere of life and from this place, and be brought up as a gentleman, in a word, as a young fellow of great expectations." My dream was out. My wild fancy was surpassed by sober reality. Miss Havisham was going to make my fortune on a grand scale. "Now, Mr. Pip," pursued the lawyer, "I address the rest of what I have to say to you. You are to understand, first, that it is the request of the person from whom I take my instructions that you always bear the name of Pip. You will have no objection, I dare say, to your great expectations being encumbered with that easy condition. But if you have any objection, this is the time to mention it." My heart was beating so fast and there was such a singing in my ears that I could scarcely stammer I had no objection. "I should think not. Now you are to understand, secondly, Mr. Pip, that the name of the person who is your liberal benefactor remains a profound secret until the person chooses to reveal it. I am empowered to mention that it is the intention of the person to reveal it at first hand by word of mouth to yourself. When or where that intention may be carried out, I cannot say, no one can say. It may be years hence. Now, you are distinctly to understand that you are most positively prohibited from making any inquiry on this head, or any allusion or reference, however distant, to any individual whomsoever as the individual, in all the communications you may have with me. If you have a suspicion in your own breast, keep that suspicion in your own breast. It is not the least to the purpose what the reasons of this prohibition are. They may be the strongest and gravest reasons, or they may be mere whim. This is not for you to inquire into. The condition is laid down. Your acceptance of it, and your observance of it as binding, is the only remaining condition that I am charged with, by the person from whom I take my instructions, and for whom I am not otherwise responsible. That person is the person from whom you derive your expectations, and the secret is solely held by that person and by me. Again, not a very difficult condition with which to encumber such a rise in fortune. But if you have any objection to it, this is the time to mention it. Speak out. Once more, I stammered with difficulty that I had no objection. "I should think not. Now, Mr. Pip, I have done with stipulations." Though he called me Mr. Pip, and began rather to make up to me, he still could not get rid of a certain air of bullying suspicion, and even now he occasionally shut his eyes and threw his finger at me while he spoke, as much as to express that he knew all kinds of things to my disparagement, if he only chose to mention them. We come next to mere details of arrangement. You must know that, although I have used the term expectations more than once, you are not endowed with expectations only. There is already lodged in my hands a sum of money amply sufficient for your suitable education and maintenance. You will please consider me your guardian. Oh, for I was going to thank him. I tell you at once, I am paid for my services, or I shouldn't render them. It is considered that you must be better educated in accordance with your altered position, and that you will be alive to the importance and necessity of at once entering on that advantage. I said I had always longed for it. "Never mind what you have always longed for, Mr. Pip," he retorted. "Keep to the record. If you long for it now, that's enough." And I answered that you are ready to be placed at once under some proper tutor. "Is that it?" I stammered, "Yes, that was it." "Good. Now, your inclinations are to be consulted. I don't think that wise, mind, but it's my trust. Have you ever heard of any tutor whom you would prefer to another?" I had never heard of any tutor but Biddy and Mr. Wopsle's great aunt, so I replied in the negative. "There is a certain tutor of whom I have some knowledge, who I think might suit the purpose," said Mr. Jaggers. "I don't recommend him. Observe, because I never recommend anybody. The gentleman I speak of is one Mr. Matthew Pocket." Ah, I caught at the name directly, Miss Havisham's relation. The Matthew whom Mr. and Mrs. Camilla had spoken of. The Matthew whose place was to be at Miss Havisham's head when she lay dead in her bride's dress on the bride's table. "You know the name," said Mr. Jaggers, looking shrewdly at me, and then shutting up his eyes while he waited for my answer. My answer was that I had heard of the name. "Oh," said he, "you have heard of the name. But the question is, what do you say of it?" I said, or tried to say, that I was much obliged to him for his recommendation. "No, my young friend," he interrupted, shaking his great head very slowly. "Recollect yourself." "Not recollecting myself, I began again that I was much obliged to him for his recommendation. "No, my young friend," he interrupted, shaking his head and frowning and smiling both at once. "No, no, no, it's very well done, but it won't do. You are too young to fix me with it. Recommendation is not the word, Mr. Pip. Try another." Correcting myself, I said that I was much obliged to him for his mention of Mr. Matthew Pocket. "That's more like it," cried Mr. Jaggers, and I added, "I would gladly try that gentleman." "Good, you had better try him in his own house. The way shall be prepared for you, and you can see his son first, who is in London." "When will you come to London?" I said, glancing at Joe, who stood looking on motionless. That I supposed I could come directly. "First," said Mr. Jaggers, "you should have some new clothes to come in, and they should not be working. Clothes, say this day week. You'll want some money. Shall I leave you 20 guineas? He produced a long purse with the greatest coolness, and counted them out on the table and pushed them over to me. This was the first time he had taken his leg from the chair. He sat astride of the chair when he had pushed the money over, and sat swinging his purse and eyeing Joe. "Well, Joseph Gargery, you look dumbfoundered." "I am," said Joe, in a very decided manner. "It was understood that you wanted nothing for yourself, remember." "It were understood," said Joe, "and it are understood, and it ever will be similar, according." "But what," said Mr. Jaggers, swinging his purse, "what if it was in my instructions to make you a present, as compensation?" "As compensation what for?" Joe demanded. "For the loss of his services." Joe laid his hand upon my shoulder with the touch of a woman. I have often thought him since like the steam hammer that can crush a man or pat an egg-shell, in his combination of strength with gentleness. "Pip is that hearty welcome," said Joe, "to go free with his services to honor and fortune, as no words can tell him. But if you think his money can make compensation to me for the loss of the little child, what come to the forge, and ever the best of friends? Oh dear good Joe, whom I was so ready to leave and so unthankful to. I see you again, with your muscular blacksmith's arm before your eyes and your broad chest heaving, and your voice dying away. Oh dear, good, faithful, tender Joe, I feel the loving tremble of your hand upon my arm, as solemnly this day as if it had been the rustle of an angel's wing. But I encouraged Joe at the time. I was lost in the mazes of my future fortunes, and could not retrace the bypaths we had trodden together. I begged Joe to be comforted, for as he said, we had ever been the best of friends, and as I said, we ever would be so. Joe scooped his eyes with his disengaged wrist as if he were bent on gouging himself, but said not another word. Mr. Jaggers had looked on at this, as one who recognized in Joe the village idiot, and in me his keeper. When it was over, he said, weighing in his hand the purse he had ceased to swing, "Now, Joseph Gargery, I warn you this is your last chance. No half measures with me. If you mean to take a present that I have it in charge to make you, speak out, and you shall have it. If on the contrary you mean to say, 'Here,' to his great amazement, he was stopped by Joe suddenly working round him with every demonstration of a fell pugilistic purpose. "Which I meant to say," cried Joe, "that if you come into my place, bull, baiting and badgering me, come out. Which I meant to say is sec if you're a man, come on. Which I meant to say that what I say, I meant to say, and stand or fall by." I drew Joe away, and he immediately became placable, merely stating to me, in an obliging manner and as a polite expostulatory notice to any one whom it might happen to concern, that he were not going to be bull, baited and badgered in his own place. Mr. Jaggers had risen when Joe demonstrated and had backed near the door. Without evincing any inclination to come in again, he there delivered his valedictory remarks. They were these: "Well, Mr. Pip, I think the sooner you leave here, as you are to be a gentleman, the better. Let it stand for this day week, and you shall receive my printed address in the meantime. You can take a hackney coach at the stage-coach office in London, and come straight to me, understand. That I express no opinion, one way or other, on the trust I undertake. I am paid for undertaking it, and I do so. Now, understand that. Finally, understand that." He was throwing his finger at both of us, and I think would have gone on but for his seeming to think Joe dangerous and going off. Something came into my head which induced me to run after him, as he was going down to the Jolly Bargeman, where he had left a hired carriage. "I beg your pardon," Mr. Jaggers. "Hulloa," said he, facing round. "What's the matter?" "I wish to be quite right, Mr. Jaggers, and to keep to your directions, so I thought I had better ask. Would there be any objection to my taking leave of anyone I know about here before I go away?" "No," said he, looking as if he hardly understood me. "I don't mean in the village only, but uptown." "No," said he. "No objection." I thanked him and ran home again, and there I found that Joe had already locked the front door and vacated the state parlor, and was seated by the kitchen fire with a hand on each knee, gazing intently at the burning coals. I too sat down before the fire and gazed at the coals, and nothing was said for a long time. My sister was in her cushioned chair in her corner, and Biddy sat at her needlework before the fire, and Joe sat next Biddy, and I sat next Joe in the corner, opposite my sister. The more I looked into the glowing coals, the more incapable I became of looking at Joe. The longer the silence lasted, the more unable I felt to speak. At length I got out, "Joe, have you told Biddy?" "No." "Pip," returned Joe, still looking at the fire and holding his knees tight as if he had private information that they intended to make off somewhere, "which I left it to yourself." "Pip, I would rather you told Joe." "Pip's a gentleman of fortune then," said Joe, "and God bless him in it." Biddy dropped her work and looked at me. Joe held his knees and looked at me. I looked at both of them. After a pause, they both heartily congratulated me, but there was a certain touch of sadness in their congratulations that I rather resented. I took it upon myself to impress Biddy, and through Biddy, Joe, with the grave obligation I considered my friends under, to know nothing and say nothing about the maker of my fortune. It would all come out in good time, I observed, and in the meanwhile nothing was to be said, save that I had come into great expectations from a mysterious patron. Biddy nodded her head thoughtfully at the fire as she took up her work again, and said she would be very particular, and Joe, still detaining his knees, said, I'll be eckervally particular, Pip," and then they congratulated me again, and went on to express so much wonder at the notion of my being a gentleman that I didn't half like it. Infinite pains were then taken by Biddy to convey to my sister some idea of what had happened. To the best of my belief, those efforts entirely failed. She laughed and nodded her head a great many times, and even repeated after Biddy the words "Pip" and "property." But I doubt if they had more meaning in them than an election cry, and I cannot suggest a darker picture of her state of mind. I never could have believed it without experience. But as Joe and Biddy became more at their cheerful ease again, I became quite gloomy, dissatisfied with my fortune. Of course I could not be, but it is possible that I may have been, without quite knowing it, dissatisfied with myself. Anyhow, I sat with my elbow on my knee and my face upon my hand, looking into the fire as those two talked about my going away, and about what they should do without me, and all that. And whenever I caught one of them looking at me, though never so pleasantly, and they often looked at me, particularly Biddy, I felt offended as if they were expressing some mistrust of me, though heaven knows they never did by word or sign. At those times I would get up and look out at the door, for our kitchen door opened at once upon the night, and stood open on summer evenings to air the room, the very stars to which I then raised my eyes. I am afraid I took to be but poor and humble stars for glittering on the rustic objects among which I had passed my life. "Saturday night," said I, when we sat at our supper of bread and cheese and beer. 5 more days, and then the day before the day, they'll soon go. "Yes, Pip," observed Joe, whose voice sounded hollow in his beer mug, "they'll soon go." Soon go," said Biddy. "I have been thinking, Joe, that when I go downtown on Monday and order my new clothes, I shall tell the tailor that I'll come and put them on there, or that I'll have them sent to Mr. Pumblechook's. It would be very disagreeable to be stared at by all the people here. Mr. and Mrs. Hubble might like to see you in your new genteel figure too." "Pip," said Joe, industriously cutting his bread, with his cheese on it, in the palm of his left hand, and glancing at my untasted supper as if he thought of the time when we used to compare slices. "So might Wopsle, and the Jolly Bargeman might take it as a compliment." "That's just what I don't want, Joe. They would make such a business of it, such a coarse and common business, that I couldn't bear myself." "Ah, that indeed, Pip," said Joe. "If you couldn't bear yourself," Biddy asked me here, as she sat holding my sister's plate, "have you thought about when you'll show yourself to Mr. Gargery and your sister and me, You will show yourself to us, won't you? Biddy. I returned with some resentment. You are so exceedingly quick that it's difficult to keep up with you. She always were quick, observed Joe. If you had waited another moment, Biddy, you would have heard me say that I shall bring my clothes here in a bundle one evening, most likely on the evening before I go away. Biddy said no more, handsomely forgiving her. I soon exchanged an affectionate good night with her and Joe, and went up to bed. When I got into my little room, I sat down and took a long look at it, as a mean little room that I should soon be parted from and raised above forever. It was furnished with fresh young remembrances too, and even at the same moment I fell into much the same confused division of mind between it and the better rooms to which I was going, as I had been in so often between the Forge and Miss Havisham's, and Biddy and Estella. The sun had been shining brightly all day on the roof of my attic, and the room was warm. As I put the window open and stood looking out, I saw Joe come slowly forth at the dark door below and take a turn or two in the air, and then I saw Biddy come and bring him a pipe and light it for him. He never smoked so late, and it seemed to hint to me that he wanted comforting for some reason or other. He presently stood at the door immediately beneath me, smoking his pipe, and Biddy stood there too, quietly talking to him, and I knew that they talked of me, for I heard my name mentioned in an endearing tone by both of them more than once. I would not have listened for more if I could have heard more, so I drew away from the window and sat down in my one chair by the bedside, feeling it very sorrowful and strange that this first night of my bright fortunes should be the loneliest I had ever known. Looking towards the open window, I saw light wreaths from Joe's pipe floating there, and I fancied it was like a blessing from Joe, not obtruded on me or paraded before me, but pervading the air we shared together. I put my light out and crept into bed, and it was an uneasy bed now, and I never slept the old sound sleep in it any more. Chapter 19. Morning made a considerable difference in my general prospect of life, and brightened it so much that it scarcely seemed the same. What lay heaviest on my mind was the consideration that 6 days intervened between me and the day of departure, for I could not divest myself of a misgiving that something might happen to London in the meanwhile, and that, when I got there, it would be either greatly deteriorated or clean gone. Joe and Biddy were very sympathetic and pleasant when I spoke of our approaching separation, but they only referred to it when I did. After breakfast, Joe brought out my indentures from the press in the best parlor, and we put them in the fire, and I felt that I was free. With all the novelty of my emancipation on me, I went to church with Joe, and thought perhaps the clergyman wouldn't have read that about the rich man and the kingdom of heaven, if he had known all. After our early dinner, I strolled out alone, purposing to finish off the marshes at once, and get them done with. As I passed the church, I felt, as I had felt during service in the morning, a sublime compassion for the poor creatures who were destined to go there, Sunday after Sunday, all their lives through, and to lie obscurely at last among the low green mounds. I promised myself that I would do something for them one of these days, and formed a plan and outline for bestowing a dinner of roast beef and plum pudding, a pint of ale, and a gallon of condescension upon everybody in the village. If I had often thought before, with something allied to shame, of my companionship with the fugitive whom I had once seen limping among those graves, what were my thoughts on this Sunday, when the place recalled the wretch, ragged and shivering, with his felon iron and badge? My comfort was that it happened a long time ago, and that he had doubtless been transported a long way off, and that he was dead to me, and might be veritably dead into the bargain. No more low, wet grounds, no more dikes and sluices, no more of these grazing cattle. Though they seemed, in their dull manner, to wear a more respectful air now, and to face round, in order that they might stare as long as possible at the possessor of such great expectations. Farewell, monotonous acquaintances of my childhood. Henceforth I was for London and greatness, not for Smith's work in general, and for you. I made my exultant way to the old Battery, and, lying down there to consider the question whether Miss Havisham intended me for Estella, fell asleep. When I awoke, I was much surprised to find Joe sitting beside me, smoking his pipe. He greeted me with a cheerful smile on my opening my eyes and said, "As being the last time, Pip, I thought I'd foller. And Joe, I am very glad you did so." "Thank ye, Pip. You may be sure, dear Joe," I went on after we had shaken hands, "that I shall never forget you." "No, no, Pip," said Joe in a comfortable tone. "I'm sure of that. Old chap, bless you. It were only necessary to get it well round in a man's mind, to be certain on it. But it took a bit of time to get it well round. The change comes so uncommon plump, didn't it? Somehow, I was not best pleased with Joe's being so mightily secure of me. I should have liked him to have betrayed emotion, or to have said, "It does you credit, Pip," or something of that sort. Therefore, I made no remark on Joe's first head, merely saying as to his second, that the tidings had indeed come suddenly, but that I had always wanted to be a gentleman, and had often and often speculated on what I would do if I were one. "Have you, though?" said Joe. "Astonishing." "It's a pity now, Joe," said I, "that you did not get on a little more when we had our lessons here, isn't it?" "Well, I don't know," returned Joe. "I'm so awful dull. I'm only master of my own trade. It were always a pity as I was so awful dull. But it's no more of a pity now than it was this day 12-month, don't you see? What I had meant was that when I came into my property and was able to do something for Joe, it would have been much more agreeable if he had been better qualified for a rise in station. He was so perfectly innocent of my meaning, however, that I thought I would mention it to Biddy in preference. So, when we had walked home and had had tea, I took Biddy into our little garden by the side of the lane, and after throwing out in a general way for the elevation of her spirits, that I should never forget her, said I had a favor to ask of her. "And it is, Biddy," said I, "that you will not omit any opportunity of helping Joe on a little." "How helping him on?" asked Biddy with a steady sort of glance. "Well, Joe is a dear good fellow. In fact, I think he is the dearest fellow that ever lived, but he is rather backward in some things. For instance, Biddy, in his learning and his manners." Although I was looking at Biddy as I spoke, and although she opened her eyes very wide when I had spoken, she did not look at me. "Oh, his manners, won't his manners do then?" asked Biddy, plucking a black-currant leaf. "My dear Biddy, they do very well here." "Oh, they do very well here," interrupted Biddy, looking closely at the leaf in her hand. "Hear me out. But if I were to remove Joe into a higher sphere, as I shall hope to remove him when I fully come into my property, they would hardly do him justice." "And don't you think he knows that?" asked Biddy. It was such a very provoking question, for it had never in the most distant manner occurred to me, that I said snappishly, "Biddy, what do you mean?" Biddy, having rubbed the leaf to pieces between her hands, and the smell of a black currant bush has ever since recalled to me that evening in the little garden by the side of the lane, said, "Have you never considered that he may be proud?" "Proud," I repeated, with disdainful emphasis. "Oh, there are many kinds of pride," said Biddy, looking full at me and shaking her head. "Pride is not all of one kind." "Well, what are you stopping for?" said I. "Not all of one kind," resumed Biddy. "He may be too proud to let anyone take him out of a place that he is competent to fill, and fills well and with respect. To tell you the truth, I think he is, though it sounds bold in me to say so, for you must know him far better than I do." "Now, Biddy," said I am very sorry to see this in you. I did not expect to see this in you. You are envious, Biddy, and grudging. You are dissatisfied on account of my rise in fortune, and you can't help showing it. If you have the heart to think so, returned Biddy, say so. Say so over and over again. If you have the heart to think so. If you have the heart to be so, you mean, Biddy, said I, in a virtuous and superior tone. Don't put it off upon me. I am very sorry to see it, and it's a bad side of human nature. I did intend to ask you to use any little opportunities you might have after I was gone, of improving dear Joe. But after this I ask you nothing. I am extremely sorry to see this in you, Biddy, I repeated. It's a bad side of human nature. Whether you scold me or approve of me, returned poor Biddy, you may equally depend upon my trying to do all that lies in my power here, at all times. And whatever opinion you take away of me shall make no difference in my remembrance of you. Yet a gentleman should not be unjust neither, said Biddy, turning away her head. I again warmly repeated that it was a bad side of human nature, in which sentiment, waiving its application, I have since seen reason to think I was right, and I walked down the little path away from Biddy, and Biddy went into the house, and I went out at the garden gate and took a dejected stroll until supper time, again feeling it very sorrowful and strange that this, the second night of my bright fortunes, should be as lonely and unsatisfactory as the first. But morning once more brightened my view, and I extended my clemency to Biddy, and we dropped the subject. Putting on the best clothes I had, I went into town as early as I could hope to find the shops open, and presented myself before Mr. Trabb, the tailor, who was having his breakfast in the parlor behind his shop, and who did not think it worth his while to come out to me, but called me in to him. "Well," said Mr. Trabb in a hail fellow, "well met kind of way. How are you, and what can I do for you?" Mr. Trabb had sliced his hot roll into 3 feather beds, and was slipping butter in between the blankets and covering it up. He was a prosperous old bachelor, and his open window looked into a prosperous little garden and orchard, and there was a prosperous iron safe let into the wall at the side of his fireplace, and I did not doubt that heaps of his prosperity were put away in it in bags. "Mr. Trabb," said I, "it's an unpleasant thing to have to mention because it looks like boasting, but I have come into a handsome property." A change passed over Mr. Trabb. He forgot the butter in bed, got up from the bedside, and wiped his fingers on the tablecloth, exclaiming, "Lord bless my soul. I am going up to my guardian in London," said I, casually drawing some guineas out of my pocket and looking at them, "and I want a fashionable suit of clothes to go in. I wish to pay for them," I added. Otherwise I thought he might only pretend to make them with ready money. "My dear sir," said Mr. Trabb as he respectfully bent his body, opened his arms, and took the liberty of touching me on the outside of each elbow. "Don't hurt me by mentioning that. May I venture to congratulate you? Would you do me the favor of stepping into the shop?" Mr. Trabb's boy was the most audacious boy in all that countryside. When I had entered, he was sweeping the shop, and he had sweetened his labors by sweeping over me. He was still sweeping when I came out into the shop with Mr. Trabb, and he knocked the broom against all possible corners and obstacles, to express, as I understood it, equality with any blacksmith alive or dead. "Hold that noise," said Mr. Trabb, with the greatest sternness, "or I'll knock your head off. Do me the favor to be seated, sir, now. This," said Mr. Trabb, taking down a roll of cloth, and tiding it out in a flowing manner over the counter, preparatory to getting his hand under it to show the gloss, "is a very sweet article. I can recommend it for your purpose, sir, because it really is extra super. But you shall see some others. Give me number 4, you," to the boy, and with a dreadfully severe stare, foreseeing the danger of that miscreant's brushing me with it, or making some other sign of familiarity. Mr. Trabb never removed his stern eye from the boy until he had deposited number 4 on the counter and was at a safe distance again. Then he commanded him to bring number 5 and number 8. "And let me have none of your tricks here," said Mr. Trabb, "or you shall repent it, you young scoundrel, the longest day you have to live." Mr. Trabb then bent over number 4, and in a sort of deferential confidence recommended it to me as a light article for summer wear, an article much in vogue among the nobility and gentry, an article that it would ever be an honor to him to reflect upon a distinguished fellow townsman's, if he might claim me for a fellow townsman having worn. "Are you bringing numbers 5 and 8, you vagabond?" said Mr. Trabb to the boy after that. "Or shall I kick you out of the shop and bring them myself?" I selected the materials for a suit, with the assistance of Mr. Trabb's judgment, and re-entered the parlor to be measured. For although Mr. Trabb had my measure already, and had previously been quite contented with it, he said apologetically that it wouldn't do under existing circumstances, sir, wouldn't do at all. So Mr. Trabb measured and calculated me in the parlor, as if I were an estate, and he the finest species of surveyor, and gave himself such a world of trouble that I felt that no suit of clothes could possibly remunerate him for his pains. When he had at last done and had appointed to send the articles to Mr. Pumblechook's on the Thursday evening, he said, with his hand upon the parlor lock, "I know, sir, that London gentlemen cannot be expected to patronize local work as a rule, but if you would give me a turn now and then in the quality of a townsman, I should greatly esteem it. Good morning, sir. Much obliged. Door." The last word was flung at the boy, who had not the least notion what it meant, but I saw him collapse as his master rubbed me out with his hands, and my first decided experience of the stupendous power of money was that it had morally laid upon his back Trabb's boy. After this memorable event, I went to the hatters and the bootmakers and the hosiers, and felt rather like Mother Hubbard's dog whose outfit required the services of so many trades. I also went to the coach office and took my place for 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. It was not necessary to explain everywhere that I had come into a handsome property. But whenever I said anything to that effect, it followed that the officiating tradesman ceased to have his attention diverted through the window by the high street and concentrated his mind upon me. When I had ordered everything I wanted, I directed my steps towards Pumblechook's, and as I approached that gentleman's place of business, I saw him standing at his door. He was waiting for me with great impatience. He had been out early with the chaise cart and had called at the forge and heard the news. He had prepared a collation for me in the Barnwell parlor, and he too ordered his shopman to come out of the gangway as my sacred person passed. "My dear friend," said Mr. Pumblechook, taking me by both hands, "when he and I and the collation were alone, I give you joy of your good fortune. Well deserved, well deserved." This was coming to the point, and I thought it a sensible way of expressing himself. "To think," said Mr. Pumblechook, after snorting admiration at me for some moments, "that I should have been the humble instrument of leading up to this is a proud reward." I begged Mr. Pumblechook to remember that nothing was to be ever said or hinted on that point. "My dear young friend," said Mr. Pumblechook, "if you will allow me to call you so." I murmured, "Certainly," and Mr. Pumblechook took me by both hands again and communicated a movement to his waistcoat, which had an emotional appearance, though it was rather low down. "My dear young friend, rely upon my doing my little all in your absence, by keeping the fact before the mind of Joseph." "Joseph," said Mr. Pumblechook, in the way of a compassionate adjuration. "Joseph, Joseph." Thereupon he shook his head and tapped it, expressing his sense of deficiency in Joseph. "But my dear young friend," said Mr. Pumblechook, "you must be hungry, you must be exhausted, be seated. Here is a chicken head round from the boar. Here is a tongue head round from the boar. Here's a tongue head round from the boar. Here's one or two little things head round from the boar, that I hope you may not despise." "But do I," said Mr. Pumblechook, getting up again the moment after he had sat down, "see afore me him as I ever sported with in his times of happy infancy, and may I. This may I meant might he shake hands. I consented, and he was fervent, and then sat down again. "Here is wine," said Mr. Pumblechook. "Let us drink, thanks to fortune, and may she ever pick out her favorites with equal judgment." "And yet I cannot," said Mr. Pumblechook, getting up again. "See afore me one, and likewise drink to one, without again expressing, may I. I said he might, and he shook hands with me again, and emptied his glass and turned it upside down. I did the same, and if I had turned myself upside down before drinking, the wine could not have gone more direct to my head. Mr. Pumblechook helped me to the liver wing, and to the best slice of tongue. None of those out of the way, no thoroughfares of pork now, and took, comparatively speaking, no care of himself at all. "Ah, poultry, you little thought," said Mr. Pumblechook, apostrophizing the fowl in the dish, "when you was a young fledgling, what was in store for you. You little thought you was to be refreshment beneath this humble roof for one as, call it a weakness if you will," said Mr. Pumblechook, getting up again. "But may I. It began to be unnecessary to repeat the form of saying he might, so he did it at once. How he ever did it so often without wounding himself with my knife, I don't know. "And your sister," he resumed, after a little steady eating, "which had the honor of bringing you up by hand. It's a sad picture to reflect that she's no longer equal to fully understanding the honor. May." I saw he was about to come at me again, and I stopped him. "We'll drink her health," said I. "Ah," cried Mr. Pumblechook, leaning back in his chair, quite flaccid with admiration. "That's the way you know him, sir. I don't know who sir was, but he certainly was not I, and there was no third person present. That's the way you know the noble-minded, sir, ever forgiving and ever affable." "It might," said the servile Pumblechook, putting down his untasted glass in a hurry and getting up again, "to a common person, have the appearance of repeating, 'But may I.'" When he had done it, he resumed his seat and drank to my sister. "Let us never be blind," said Mr. Pumblechook, "to her faults of temper, but it is to be hoped she meant well." At about this time I began to observe that he was getting flushed in the face. As to myself, I felt all face, steeped in wine and smarting. I mentioned to Mr. Pumblechook that I wished to have my new clothes sent to his house, and he was ecstatic on my so distinguishing him. I mentioned my reason for desiring to avoid observation in the village, and he lauded it to the skies. There was nobody but himself, he intimated, worthy of my confidence, and in short, might he. Then he asked me tenderly if I remembered our boyish games at sums, and how we had gone together to have me bound apprentice, and, in effect, how he had ever been my favorite fancy and my chosen friend. If I had taken 10 times as many glasses of wine as I had, I should have known that he never had stood in that relation towards me, and should in my heart of hearts have repudiated the idea. Yet for all that, I remember feeling convinced that I had been much mistaken in him, and that he was a sensible, practical, good-hearted prime fellow. By degrees he fell to reposing such great confidence in me as to ask my advice in reference to his own affairs. He mentioned that there was an opportunity for a great amalgamation and monopoly of the corn and seed trade on those premises, if enlarged, such as had never occurred before in that or any other neighborhood. What alone was wanting to the realization of a vast fortune he considered to be more capital. Those were the 2 little words, more capital. Now it appeared to him, Pumblechook, that if that capital were got into the business through a sleeping partner, sir, which sleeping partner would have nothing to do but walk in by self or deputy, whenever he pleased, and examine the books, and walk in twice a year and take his profits away in his pocket to the tune of 50%, it appeared to him that that might be an opening for a young gentleman of spirit combined with property, which would be worthy of his attention. But what did I think? He had great confidence in my opinion, and what did I think? I gave it as my opinion. Wait a bit. The united vastness and distinctness of this view so struck him that he no longer asked if he might shake hands with me, but said he really must, and did. We drank all the wine, and Mr. Pumblechook pledged himself over and over again to keep Joseph up to the mark. I don't know what mark, and to render me efficient and constant service. I don't know what service. He also made known to me for the first time in my life, and certainly after having kept his secret wonderfully well, that he had always said of me, "That boy is no common boy, and mark me, his fortune will be no common fortune." He said with a tearful smile that it was a singular thing to think of now, and I said so too. Finally, I went out into the air, with a dim perception that there was something unwonted in the conduct of the sunshine, and found that I had slumberously got to the turnpike without having taken any account of the road. There I was roused by Mr. Pumblechook's hailing me. He was a long way down the sunny street, and was making expressive gestures for me to stop. I stopped, and he came up breathless. "No, my dear friend," said he, when he had recovered wind for speech, "not if I can help it. This occasion shall not entirely pass without that affability on your part. May I, as an old friend and well-wisher, may I?" We shook hands for the 100th time at least, and he ordered a young carter out of my way with the greatest indignation. Then he blessed me and stood waving his hand to me until I had passed the crook in the road, and then I turned into a field and had a long nap under a hedge before I pursued my way home. I had scant luggage to take with me to London, for little of the little I possessed was adapted to my new station, but I began packing that same afternoon, and wildly packed up things that I knew I should want next morning, in a fiction that there was not a moment to be lost. So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday passed, and on Friday morning I went to Mr. Pumblechook's to put on my new clothes and pay my visit to Miss Havisham. Mr. Pumblechook's own room was given up to me to dress in, and was decorated with clean towels expressly for the event. My clothes were rather a disappointment, of course. Probably every new and eagerly expected garment ever put on since clothes came in fell a trifle short of the wearer's expectation. But after I had had my new suit on some half an hour, and had gone through an immensity of posturing with Mr. Pumblechook's very limited dressing glass in the futile endeavor to see my legs, it seemed to fit me better. It being market morning at a neighboring town some 10 miles off, Mr. Pumblechook was not at home. I had not told him exactly when I meant to leave, and was not likely to shake hands with him again before departing. This was all as it should be, and I went out in my new array, fearfully ashamed of having to pass the shopman, and suspicious after all that I was at a personal disadvantage, something like Joe's in his Sunday suit. I went circuitously to Miss Havisham's by all the back ways, and rang at the bell constrainedly, on account of the stiff long fingers of my gloves. Sarah Pocket came to the gate, and positively reeled back when she saw me so changed, her walnut shell countenance likewise turned from brown to green and yellow. "You?" said she. "You? Good gracious, what do you want?" "I am going to London, Miss Pocket," said I, "and want to say good-bye to Miss Havisham." I was not expected, for she left me locked in the yard While she went to ask if I were to be admitted, after a very short delay she returned and took me up, staring at me all the way. Miss Havisham was taking exercise in the room with the long-spread table, leaning on her crutch stick. The room was lighted as of yore, and at the sound of our entrance, she stopped and turned. She was then just abreast of the rotted bride cake. "Don't go, Sarah," she said. "Well, Pip, I start for London, Miss Havisham, tomorrow." I was exceedingly careful what I said, and I thought you would kindly not mind my taking leave of you. "This is a gay figure, Pip," said she, making her crutch stick play round me, as if she, the fairy godmother who had changed me, were bestowing the finishing gift. "I have come into such good fortune since I saw you last, Miss Havisham," I murmured, "and I am so grateful for it, Miss Havisham." "Hey, said she, looking at the discomfited and envious Sarah with delight. "I have seen Mr. Jaggers. I have heard about it. Pip, so you go tomorrow?" "Yes, Miss Havisham." "And you are adopted by a rich person?" "Yes, Miss Havisham, not named." "No, Miss Havisham, and Mr. Jaggers is made your guardian." "Yes, Miss Havisham." She quite gloated on these questions and answers, so keen was her enjoyment of Sarah Pocket's jealous dismay. "Well," she went on, "you have a promising career before you. Be good, deserve it, and abide by Mr. Jaggers's instructions." She looked at me and looked at Sarah, and Sarah's countenance wrung out of her watchful face a cruel smile. "Good bye, Pip. You will always keep the name of Pip, you know." "Yes, Miss Havisham." "Good bye, Pip." She stretched out her hand, and I went down on my knee and put it to my lips. I had not considered how I should take leave of her. It came naturally to me at the moment to do this. She looked at Sarah Pocket with triumph in her weird eyes, and so I left my fairy godmother, with both her hands on her crutch stick, standing in the midst of the dimly lighted room beside the rotten bride cake that was hidden in cobwebs. Sarah Pocket conducted me down, as if I were a ghost who must be seen out. She could not get over my appearance, and was in the last degree confounded. I said, "Good-bye, Miss Pocket," but she merely stared, and did not seem collected enough to know that I had spoken. Clear of the house, I made the best of my way back to Pumblechook's, took off my new clothes, made them into a bundle, and went back home in my older dress, carrying it, to speak the truth, much more at my ease too, though I had the bundle to carry. And now, those 6 days which were to have run out so slowly had run out fast and were gone, and tomorrow looked me in the face more steadily than I could look at it. As the 6 evenings had dwindled away to 5, to 4, to 3, to 2, I had become more and more appreciative of the society of Joe and Biddy. On this last evening, I dressed myself out in my new clothes for their delight, and sat in my splendor until bedtime. We had a hot supper on the occasion, graced by the inevitable roast fowl, and we had some flip to finish with. We were all very low, and none the higher for pretending to be in spirits. I was to leave our village at 5 in the morning, carrying my little hand portmanteau, and I had told Joe that I wished to walk away all alone. I am afraid, sore afraid, that this purpose originated in my sense of the contrast there would be between me and Joe if we went to the coach together. I had pretended with myself that there was nothing of this taint in the arrangement, but when I went up to my little room on this last night, I felt compelled to admit that it might be so, and had an impulse upon me to go down again and entreat Joe to walk with me in the morning. I did not. All night there were coaches in my broken sleep, going to wrong places instead of to London, and having in the traces now dogs, now cats, now pigs, now men. Never horses. Fantastic failures of journeys occupied me until the day dawned and the birds were singing. Then I got up and partly dressed, and sat at the window to take a last look out, and in taking it fell asleep. Biddy was astir so early to get my breakfast, that, although I did not sleep at the window an hour, I smelt the smoke of the kitchen fire when I started up with a terrible idea that it must be late in the afternoon. But long after that, and long after I had heard the clinking of the teacups, and was quite ready, I wanted the resolution to go downstairs after all. I remained up there, repeatedly unlocking and unstrapping my small portmanteau and locking and strapping it up again, until Biddy called to me that I was late. It was a hurried breakfast with no taste in it. I got up from the meal, saying with a sort of briskness, as if it had only just occurred to me, "Well, I suppose I must be off." And then I kissed my sister, who was laughing and nodding and shaking in her usual chair, and kissed Biddy and threw my arms around Joe's neck. Then I took up my little portmanteau and walked out. The last I saw of them was when I presently heard a scuffle behind me, and looking back, saw Joe throwing an old shoe after me and Biddy throwing another old shoe. I stopped then to wave my hat, and dear old Joe waved his strong right arm above his head, crying huskily, "Horror!" and Biddy put her apron to her face. I walked away at a good pace, thinking it was easier to go than I had supposed it would be, and reflecting that it would never have done to have had an old shoe thrown after the coach. In sight of all the high street, I whistled and made nothing of going, but the village was very peaceful and quiet, and the light mists were solemnly rising, as if to show me the world, and I had been so innocent and little there, and all beyond was so unknown and great, that in a moment with a strong heave and sob I broke into tears. It was by the finger post at the end of the village, and I laid my hand upon it and said, "Goodbye, oh my dear, dear friend. Heaven knows we need never be ashamed of our tears, for they are rain upon the blinding dust of earth, overlying our hard hearts." I was better after I had cried than before, more sorry, more aware of my own ingratitude, more gentle. If I had cried before, I should have had Joe with me then, so subdued I was by those tears and by their breaking out again in the course of the quiet walk, that when I was on the coach and it was clear of the town, I deliberated with an aching heart whether I would not get down when we changed horses and walk back, and have another evening at home, and a better parting. We changed, and I had not made up my mind, and still reflected for my comfort that it would be quite practicable to get down and walk back when we changed again. And while I was occupied with these deliberations, I would fancy an exact resemblance to Joe and some man coming along the road towards us, and my heart would beat high, as if he could possibly be there. We changed again, and yet again, and it was now too late and too far to go back, and I went on, and the mists had all solemnly risen now, and the world lay spread before me. Chapter 20. The journey from our town to the metropolis was a journey of about 5 hours. It was a little past midday when the four-horse stagecoach, by which I was a passenger, got into the ravel of traffic frayed out about the Cross Keys, Wood Street, Cheapside, London. We Britons had at that time particularly settled that it was treasonable to doubt our having and our being the best of everything. Otherwise, while I was scared by the immensity of London, I think I might have had some faint doubts whether it was not rather ugly, crooked, narrow, and dirty. Mr. Jaggers had duly sent me his address. It was Little Britain, and he had written after it on his card, just out of Smithfield and close by the coach office. Nevertheless, a hackney coachman, who seemed to have as many capes to his greasy great coat as he was years old, packed me up in his coach and hemmed me in with a folding and jingling barrier of steps as if he were going to take me 50 miles. His getting on his box, which I remember to have been decorated with an old weather, stained pea-green hammercloth moth, eaten into rags, was quite a work of time. It was a wonderful equipage, with 6 great coronets outside and ragged things behind for, I don't know how many footmen to hold on by, and a harrow below them, to prevent amateur footmen from yielding to the temptation. I had scarcely had time to enjoy the coach and to think how like a straw yard it was, and yet how like a rag shop, and to wonder why the horses' nose bags were kept inside, when I observed the coachman beginning to get down, as if we were going to stop presently. And stop we presently did, in a gloomy street, at certain offices with an open door, whereon was painted Mr. Jaggers. "How much?" I asked the coachman. The coachman answered, "A shilling, unless you wish to make it more." I naturally said I had no wish to make it more. "Then it must be a shilling," observed the coachman. "I don't want to get into trouble." I know him. He darkly closed an eye at Mr. Jaggers's name, and shook his head when he had got his shilling, and had in course of time completed the ascent to his box and had got away, which appeared to relieve his mind. I went into the front office with my little portmanteau in my hand and asked, was Mr. Jaggers at home? "He is not," returned the clerk. "He is in court at present." "Am I addressing Mr. Pip?" I signified that he was addressing Mr. Pip. Mr. Jaggers left word. Would you wait in his room? He couldn't say how long he might be, having a case on, but it stands to reason, his time being valuable, that he won't be longer than he can help. With those words, the clerk opened a door and ushered me into an inner chamber at the back. Here, we found a gentleman with one eye in a velveteen suit and knee breeches, who wiped his nose with his sleeve on being interrupted in the perusal of the newspaper. "Go and wait outside, Mike," said the clerk. I began to say that I hoped I was not interrupting, when the clerk shoved this gentleman out with as little ceremony as I ever saw used, and tossing his fur cap out after him, left me alone. Mr. Jaggers' room was lighted by a skylight only, and was a most dismal place, the skylight eccentrically pitched like a broken head, and the distorted adjoining houses looking as if they had twisted themselves to peep down at me through it. There were not so many papers about as I should have expected to see, and there were some odd objects about that I should not have expected to see, such as an old rusty pistol, a sword in a scabbard, several strange-looking boxes and packages, and 2 dreadful casts on a shelf, of faces peculiarly swollen, and twitchy about the nose. Mr. Jaggers' own high-backed chair was of deadly black horsehair with rows of brass nails round it like a coffin, and I fancied I could see how he leaned back in it and bit his forefinger at the clients. The room was but small, and the clients seemed to have had a habit of backing up against the wall especially opposite to Mr. Jaggers' chair being greasy with shoulders. I recalled, too, that the one-eyed gentleman had shuffled forth against the wall when I was the innocent cause of his being turned out. I sat down in the cliental chair placed over against Mr. Jaggers' chair, and became fascinated by the dismal atmosphere of the place. I called to mind that the clerk had the same air of knowing something to everybody else's disadvantage as his master had. I wondered how many other clerks there were upstairs, and whether they all claimed to have the same detrimental mastery of their fellow creatures. I wondered what was the history of all the odd litter about the room, and how it came there. I wondered whether the 2 swollen faces were of Mr. Jaggers' family, and, if he were so unfortunate as to have had a pair of such ill-looking relations, why he stuck them on that dusty perch for the blacks and flies to settle on, instead of giving them a place at home. Of course, I had no experience of a London summer day, and my spirits may have been oppressed by the hot exhausted air and by the dust and grit that lay thick on everything. But I sat wondering and waiting in Mr. Jaggers' close room until I really could not bear the 2 casts on the shelf above Mr. Jaggers' chair, and got up and went out. When I told the clerk that I would take a turn in the air while I waited, he advised me to go round the corner, and I should come into Smithfield. So I came into Smithfield, and the shameful place, being all a smear with filth and fat and blood and foam, seemed to stick to me. So I rubbed it off with all possible speed by turning into a street where I saw the great black dome of St. Paul's bulging at me from behind a grim stone building, which a bystander said was Newgate Prison. Following the wall of the jail, I found the roadway covered with straw to deaden the noise of passing vehicles, and from this, and from the quantity of people standing about smelling strongly of spirits and beer, I inferred that the trials were on. While I looked about me here, an exceedingly dirty and partially drunk minister of justice asked me if I would like to step in and hear a trial or so, informing me that he could give me a front place for half a crown, whence I should command a full view of the Lord Chief Justice in his wig and robes, mentioning that awful personage like waxwork, and presently offering him at the reduced price of 18 pence. As I declined the proposal on the plea of an appointment, he was so good as to take me into a yard and show me where the gallows was kept, and also where people were publicly whipped, and then he showed me the debtor's door, out of which culprits came to be hanged, heightening the interest of that dreadful portal by giving me to understand that 4 on M would come out at that door the day after tomorrow at 8 in the morning to be killed in a row. This was horrible, and gave me a sickening idea of London, the more so as the Lord Chief Justice's proprietor wore, from his hat down to his boots and up again to his pocket, handkerchief inclusive mildewed clothes which had evidently not belonged to him originally, and which I took it into my head he had bought cheap of the executioner. Under these circumstances I thought myself well rid of him for a shilling. I dropped into the office to ask if Mr. Jaggers had come in yet, and I found he had not, and I strolled out again. This time I made the tour of Little Britain and turned into Bartholomew Close, and now I became aware that other people were waiting about for Mr. Jaggers as well as I. There were 2 men of secret appearance lounging in Bartholomew Close, and thoughtfully fitting their feet into the cracks of the pavement as they talked together, one of whom said to the other when they first passed me, that Jaggers would do it if it was to be done. There was a knot of 3 men and 2 women standing at a corner, and one of the women was crying on her dirty shawl, and the other comforted her by saying, as she pulled her own shawl over her shoulders, "Jaggers is for him, Melia, and what more could you have?" There was a red-eyed little Jew who came into the close while I was loitering there, in company with a second little Jew whom he sent upon an errand, and while the messenger was gone, I remarked this Jew, who was of a highly excitable temperament, performing a jig of anxiety under a lamp-post and accompanying himself, in a kind of frenzy, with the words, "O Jaggerth, 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 Jaggerth all otherth ith cag maggerth, give me Jaggerth." These testimonies to the popularity of my guardian made a deep impression on me, and I admired and wondered more than ever. At length, as I was looking out at the iron gate of Bartholomew close into Little Britain, I saw Mr. Jaggers coming across the road towards me. All the others who were waiting saw him at the same time, and there was quite a rush at him. Mr. Jaggers, putting a hand on my shoulder and walking me on at his side without saying anything to me, addressed himself to his followers. First, he took the two secret men. "Now, I have nothing to say to you," said Mr. Jaggers, throwing his finger at them. "I want to know no more than I know. As to the result, it's a toss-up. I told you from the first it was a toss-up. Have you paid Wemmick?" "We made the money up this morning, sir," said one of the men, submissively, while the other perused Mr. Jaggers's face. "I don't ask you when you made it up, or where, or whether you made it up at all. Has Wemmick got it?" "Yes, sir," said both the men together. "Very well, then you may go." "Now, I won't have it," said Mr. Jaggers, waving his hand at them to put them behind him. "If you say a word to me, I'll throw up the case." "We thought, Mr. Jaggers," one of the men began, pulling off his hat. "That's what I told you not to do," said Mr. Jaggers. "You thought. I think for you, that's enough for you. If I want you, I know where to find you. I don't want you to find me now. I won't have it. I won't hear a word." The two men looked at one another as Mr. Jaggers waved them behind again, and humbly fell back and were heard no more. "And now you," said Mr. Jaggers, suddenly stopping, and turning on the two women with the shawls from whom the three men had meekly separated. "Oh, Amelia, is it?" "Yes, Mr. Jaggers." "And do you remember," retorted Mr. Jaggers, "that but for me you wouldn't be here and couldn't be here?" "Oh, yes, sir," exclaimed both women together. "Lord bless you, sir. Well, we knows that." "Then why," said Mr. Jaggers, "do you come here?" "My bill, sir," the crying woman pleaded. "Now I tell you what," said Mr. Jaggers. "Once for all, if you don't know that your bill's in good hands, I know it, and if you come here bothering about your bill, I'll make an example of both your bill and you, and let him slip through my fingers. Have you paid Wemmick?" "Oh, yes, sir, every farden." "Very well. Then you have done all you have got to do. Say another word, one single word, and Wemmick shall give you your money back." This terrible threat caused the two women to fall off immediately. No one remained now but the excitable Jew, who had already raised the skirts of Mr. Jaggers' coat to his lips several times. "I don't know this man," said Mr. Jaggers in the same devastating strain. "What does this fellow want?" "Ma theer mither Jaggerth, hound brother to Abraham Latharuth." "Who's he?" said Mr. Jaggers. "Let go of my coat." The suitor, kissing the hem of the garment again before relinquishing it, replied, "Abraham Latharuth on Thuthpithian of Plate." "You're too late," said Mr. Jaggers. "I am over the way." "Holy Father, Mither Jaggerth," cried my excitable acquaintance, turning white. "Don't tay you're again Abraham Latharuth." "I am," said Mr. Jaggers, "and there's an end of it. Get out of the way." "Mither Jaggerth, half a moment. My hound Cuthant gone to Mither Wemmick at 5th minute, to offer him Hanny Termth. Mither Jaggerth, half a quarter of a moment. If you'd have the Condeth and Thun to be bought off from the Teether Thide at Hanny Thuperir Prythe. Money no object. Mither Jaggerth Mither." My guardian threw his supplicant off with supreme indifference, and left him dancing on the pavement as if it were red hot. Without further interruption, we reached the front office, where we found the clerk and the man in velveteen with the fur cap. "Here's Mike," said the clerk, getting down from his stool and approaching Mr. Jaggers confidentially. "Oh," said Mr. Jaggers, turning to the man, who was pulling a lock of hair in the middle of his forehead like the bull in Cock Robin pulling at the bell rope. "Your man comes on this afternoon." Well, Master Jaggers," returned Mike, in the voice of a sufferer from a constitutional cold. "Arter a deal o' trouble, I've found one, sir, as might do." "What is he prepared to swear?" "Well, Master Jaggers," said Mike, wiping his nose on his fur cap this time, "in a general way, anythink." Mr. Jaggers suddenly became most irate. "Now, I warned you before," said he, throwing his forefinger at the terrified client, "that if you ever presume to talk in that way here, I'd make an example of you, you infernal scoundrel. How dare you tell me that?" The client looked scared, but bewildered too, as if he were unconscious what he had done. "Spoony," said the clerk, in a low voice, giving him a stir with his elbow. "Soft head. Need you say it face to face?" "Now, I ask you, you blundering booby," said my guardian very sternly, "once more and for the last time, what the man you have brought here is prepared to swear." Mike looked hard at my guardian, as if he were trying to learn a lesson from his face, and slowly replied, either to character or to having been in his company and never left him all the night in question, "Now, be careful. In what station of life is this man?" Mike looked at his cap and looked at the floor and looked at the ceiling and looked at the clerk and even looked at me before beginning to reply in a nervous manner. "We've dressed him up like," when my guardian blustered out. "What you will you, Spoony?" added the clerk again with another stir. After some helpless casting about, Mike brightened and began again. "He is dressed like a spectable pieman, a sort of a pastry cook." "Is he here?" asked my guardian. "I left him," said Mike, "a-setting on some doorsteps round the corner. Take him past that window and let me see him." The window indicated was the office window. We all three went to it behind the wire blind, and presently saw the client go by in an accidental manner, with a murderous-looking tall individual in a short suit of white linen and a paper cap. This guileless confectioner was not by any means sober, and had a black eye in the green stage of recovery which was painted over. "Tell him to take his witness away directly," said my guardian to the clerk, in extreme disgust, "and ask him what he means by bringing such a fellow as that." My guardian then took me into his own room, and while he lunched, standing, from a sandwich box and a pocket flask of sherry, he seemed to bully his very sandwich as he ate it, informed me what arrangements he had made for me. I was to go to Barnard's Inn, to young Mr. Pocket's rooms, where a bed had been sent in for my accommodation. I was to remain with young Mr. Pocket until Monday. On Monday I was to go with him to his father's house on a visit, that I might try how I liked it. Also, I was told what my allowance was to be. It was a very liberal one, and had handed to me from one of my guardian's drawers the cards of certain tradesmen with whom I was to deal for all kinds of clothes and such other things as I could in reason want. "You will find your credit good, Mr. Pip," said my guardian, whose flask of sherry smelt like a whole caskful as he hastily refreshed himself. "But I shall by this means be able to check your bills, and to pull you up if I find you outrunning the constable. Of course you'll go wrong somehow, but that's no fault of mine." After I had pondered a little over this encouraging sentiment, I asked Mr. Jaggers if I could send for a coach. He said it was not worth while. I was so near my destination. Wemmick should walk round with me, if I pleased. I then found that Wemmick was the clerk in the next room. Another clerk was rung down from upstairs to take his place while he was out, and I accompanied him into the street. After shaking hands with my guardian, we found a new set of people lingering outside, but Wemmick made a way among them by saying coolly yet decisively, "I tell you it's no use. He won't have a word to say to one of you." And we soon got clear of them and went on side by side. Chapter 21. Casting my eyes on Mr. Wemmick as we went along to see what he was like in the light of day, I found him to be a dry man rather short in stature, with a square wooden face, whose expression seemed to have been imperfectly chipped out with a dull-edged chisel. There were some marks in it that might have been dimples, if the material had been softer and the instrument finer, but which, as it was, were only dents. The chisel had made 3 or 4 of these attempts at embellishment over his nose, but had given them up without an effort to smooth them off. I judged him to be a bachelor from the frayed condition of his linen, and he appeared to have sustained a good many bereavements, for he wore at least 4 mourning rings, besides a brooch representing a lady and a weeping willow at a tomb with an urn on it. I noticed, too, that several rings and seals hung at his watch chain, as if he were quite laden with remembrances of departed friends. He had glittering eyes, small, keen, and black, and thin, wide-mottled lips. He had had them, to the best of my belief, from 40 to 50 years. "So you were never in London before?" said Mr. Wemmick to me. "No," said I. "I was new here once," said Mr. Wemmick. "Rum to think of now. You are well acquainted with it now." Why, yes, said Mr. Wemmick. I know the moves of it. Is it a very wicked place? I asked, more for the sake of saying something than for information. You may get cheated, robbed, and murdered in London, but there are plenty of people anywhere who'll do that for you. If there is bad blood between you and them, said I, to soften it off a little. Oh, I don't know about bad blood, returned Mr. Wemmick. There's not much bad blood about. They'll do it if there's anything to be got by it. That makes it worse. You think so? Returned Mr. Wemmick. Much about the same, I should say. He wore his hat on the back of his head and looked straight before him, walking in a self-contained way as if there were nothing in the streets to claim his attention. His mouth was such a post office of a mouth that he had a mechanical appearance of smiling. We had got to the top of Holborn Hill before I knew that it was merely a mechanical appearance and that he was not smiling at all. Do you know where Mr. Matthew Pocket lives? I asked Mr. Wemmick. Yes, said he, nodding in the direction. At Hammersmith, west of London. Is that far? Well, say 5 miles. Do you know him? Why, you're a regular cross-examiner, said Mr. Wemmick, looking at me with an approving air. Yes, I know him. I know him. There was an air of toleration or depreciation about his utterance of these words that rather depressed me, and I was still looking sideways at his block of a face in search of any encouraging note to the text when he said here we were at Barnard's Inn. My depression was not alleviated by the announcement, for I had supposed that establishment to be an hotel kept by Mr. Barnard, to which the Blue Boar in our town was a mere public house, whereas I now found Barnard to be a disembodied spirit or a fiction, and his inn the dingiest collection of shabby buildings ever squeezed together in a rank corner as a club for tomcats. We entered this haven through a wicket gate, and were disgorged by an introductory passage into a melancholy little square that looked to me like a flat burying ground. I thought it had the most dismal trees in it, and the most dismal sparrows, and the most dismal cats, and the most dismal houses in number 6 or so that I had ever seen. I thought the windows of the sets of chambers into which those houses were divided were in every stage of dilapidated blind and curtain, crippled flower pot, cracked glass, dusty decay, and miserable makeshift, while to let glared at me from empty rooms, as if no new wretches ever came there, and the vengeance of the soul of Barnard were being slowly appeased by the gradual suicide of the present occupants, and their unholy interment under the gravel. A frowsy morning of soot and smoke attired this forlorn creation of Barnard, and it had strewn ashes on its head, and was undergoing penance and humiliation as a mere dust-hole. Thus far my sense of sight, while dry rot and wet rot and all the silent rots that rot in neglected roof and cellar, rot of rat and mouse and bug and coaching, stables near at hand besides, addressed themselves faintly to my sense of smell and moaned, "Try Barnard's mixture." So imperfect was this realization of the first of my great expectations that I looked in dismay at Mr. Wemmick. "Ah," said he, mistaking me, "the retirement reminds you of the country." "So it does me." He led me into a corner and conducted me up a flight of stairs which appeared to me to be slowly collapsing into sawdust, so that one of those days the upper lodgers would look out at their doors and find themselves without the means of coming down to a set of chambers on the top floor. Mr. Pocket, June, was painted on the door, and there was a label on the letterbox, "Return shortly." "He hardly thought you'd come so soon," Mr. Wemmick explained. "You don't want me any more?" "No, thank you," said I. "As I keep the cash," Mr. Wemmick observed, "we shall most likely meet pretty often. Good day, good day." I put out my hand, and Mr. Wemmick at first looked at it as if he thought I wanted something. Then he looked at me and said, correcting himself, "To be sure. Yes, you're in the habit of shaking hands." I was rather confused, thinking it must be out of the London fashion, but said yes. "I have got so out of it," said Mr. Wemmick, "except at last, very glad, I'm sure, to make your acquaintance." Good day. When we had shaken hands and he was gone, I opened the staircase window and had nearly beheaded myself, for the lines had rotted away, and it came down like the guillotine. Happily it was so quick that I had not put my head out. After this escape, I was content to take a foggy view of the inn through the windows encrusting dirt, and to stand dolefully looking out, saying to myself that London was decidedly overrated. Mr. Pocket, Junior's idea of shortly was not mine, for I had nearly maddened myself with looking out for half an hour, and had written my name with my fingers several times in the dirt of every pane in the window before I heard footsteps on the stairs. Gradually there arose before me the hat, head, neckcloth, waistcoat, trousers, boots of a member of society of about my own standing. He had a paper bag under each arm and a pottle of strawberries in one hand and was out of breath. "Mr. Pip," said he. "Mr. Pocket," said I. "Dear me," he exclaimed. "I am extremely sorry, but I knew there was a coach from your part of the country at midday, and I thought you would come by that one. The fact is, I have been out on your account. Not that that is any excuse, for I thought, coming from the country, you might like a little fruit after dinner, and I went to Covent Garden Market to get it good. For a reason that I had, I felt as if my eyes would start out of my head. I acknowledged his attention incoherently and began to think this was a dream. "Dear me," said Mr. Pocket, Jr., "this door sticks so." As he was fast making jam of his fruit by wrestling with the door while the paper bags were under his arms, I begged him to allow me to hold them. He relinquished them with an agreeable smile and combated with the door as if it were a wild beast. It yielded so suddenly at last that he staggered back upon me, and I staggered back upon the opposite door, and we both laughed. But still I felt as if my eyes must start out of my head, and as if this must be a dream. "Pray come in," said Mr. Pocket, Jr. "Allow me to lead the way. I am rather bare here, but I hope you'll be able to make out tolerably well till Monday. My father thought you would get on more agreeably through tomorrow with me than with him, and might like to take a walk about London. I am sure I shall be very happy to show London to you. As to our table, you won't find that bad, I hope, for it will be supplied from our coffee house here, and it is only right I should add at your expense, such being Mr. Jaggers' directions. As to our lodging, it's not by any means splendid, because I have my own bread to earn, and my father hasn't anything to give me, and I shouldn't be willing to take it if he had. This is our sitting room, just such chairs and tables and carpet and so forth, you see, as they could spare from home. You mustn't give me credit for the tablecloth and spoons and casters because they come for you from the coffee house. This is my little bedroom, rather musty, but Barnard's is musty. This is your bedroom. The furniture's hired for the occasion, but I trust it will answer the purpose if you should want anything. I'll go and fetch it. The chambers are retired, and we shall be alone together, but we shan't fight, I dare say. But dear me, I beg your pardon, you're holding the fruit all this time. Pray let me take these bags from you. I am quite ashamed." As I stood opposite to Mr. Pocket, Jr., delivering him the bags, 1, 2, I saw the starting appearance come into his own eyes that I knew to be in mine, and he said, falling back, "Lord bless me, you're the prowling boy, and you," said I, "are the pale young gentleman." Chapter 22. The pale young gentleman and I stood contemplating one another in Barnard's Inn until we both burst out laughing. "The idea of its being you," said he. "The idea of its being you," said I, and then we contemplated one another afresh and laughed again. "Well," said the pale young gentleman, reaching out his hand good-humoredly, "it's all over now, I hope, and it will be magnanimous in you if you'll forgive me for having knocked you about so." I derived from this speech that Mr. Herbert Pocket, for Herbert was the pale young gentleman's name, still rather confounded his intention with his execution, but I made a modest reply, and we shook hands warmly. "You hadn't come into your good fortune at that time," said Herbert Pocket. "No," said I. He acquiesced. "I heard it had happened very lately. I was rather on the lookout for good fortune then." "Indeed." "Yes, Miss Havisham had sent for me to see if she could take a fancy to me, but she couldn't. At all events, she didn't." I thought it polite to remark that I was surprised to hear that. "Bad taste," said Herbert, laughing, "but a fact. Yes, she had sent for me on a trial visit, and if I had come out of it successfully, I suppose I should have been provided for. Perhaps I should have been what you may called it to Estella." "What's that?" I asked with sudden gravity. He was arranging his fruit in plates while we talked, which divided his attention, and was the cause of his having made this lapse of a word. "Affianced," he explained, still busy with the fruit. "Betrothed, engaged, what's his name? Any word of that sort. How did you bear your disappointment? I asked. Pooh, said he. I didn't care much for it. She's a Tartar. Miss Havisham, I don't say no to that, but I meant Estella. That girl's hard and haughty and capricious to the last degree, and has been brought up by Miss Havisham to wreak revenge on all the male sex. What relation is she to Miss Havisham? None, said he. Only adopted. Why should she wreak revenge on all the male sex? What revenge? Mr. Pip, said he. Don't you know? No, said I. Dear me. It's quite a story and shall be saved till dinner time. And now let me take the liberty of asking you a question. How did you come there that day? I told him, and he was attentive until I had finished, and then burst out laughing again, and asked me if I was sore afterwards. I didn't ask him if he was, for my conviction on that point was perfectly established. Mr. Jaggers is your guardian, I understand, he went on. Yes, you know he is Miss Havisham's man of business and solicitor, and has her confidence when nobody else has. This was bringing me, I felt, towards dangerous ground. I answered with a constraint I made no attempt to disguise, that I had seen Mr. Jaggers in Miss Havisham's house on the very day of our combat, but never at any other time, and that I believed he had no recollection of having ever seen me there. He was so obliging as to suggest my father for your tutor, and he called on my father to propose it. Of course he knew about my father from his connection with Miss Havisham. My father is Miss Havisham's cousin. Not that that implies familiar intercourse between them, for he is a bad courtier and will not propitiate her. Herbert Pocket had a frank and easy way with him that was very taking. I had never seen anyone then, and I have never seen anyone since, who more strongly expressed to me, in every look and tone, a natural incapacity to do anything secret and mean. There was something wonderfully hopeful about his general air, and something that at the same time whispered to me he would never be very successful or rich. I don't know how this was. I became imbued with the notion on that first occasion before we sat down to dinner, but I cannot define by what means. He was still a pale young gentleman, and had a certain conquered languor about him in the midst of his spirits and briskness that did not seem indicative of natural strength. He had not a handsome face, but it was better than handsome, being extremely amiable and cheerful. His figure was a little ungainly, as in the days when my knuckles had taken such liberties with it, but it looked as if it would always be light and young. Whether Mr. Trabb's local work would have sat more gracefully on him than on me may be a question, but I am conscious that he carried off his rather old clothes much better than I carried off my new suit. As he was so communicative, I felt that reserve on my part would be a bad return unsuited to our years. I therefore told him my small story, and laid stress on my being forbidden to inquire who my benefactor was. I further mentioned that as I had been brought up a blacksmith in a country place, and knew very little of the ways of politeness, I would take it as a great kindness in him if he would give me a hint whenever he saw me at a loss or going wrong. With pleasure, said he, though I venture to prophesy that you'll want very few hints. I dare say we shall be often together, and I should like to banish any needless restraint between us. Will you do me the favor to begin at once to call me by my Christian name, Herbert? I thanked him and said I would. I informed him in exchange that my Christian name was Philip. I don't take to Philip, said he, smiling, for it sounds like a moral boy out of the spelling book, who was so lazy that he fell into a pond, or so fat that he couldn't see out of his eyes, or so avaricious that he locked up his cake till the mice ate it, or so determined to go a birds, nesting that he got himself eaten by bears who lived handy in the neighborhood. I tell you what I should like. We are so harmonious, and you have been a blacksmith. Would you mind it? I shouldn't mind anything that you propose, I answered, but I don't understand you. Would you mind Handel for a familiar name? There's a charming piece of music by Handel called The Harmonious Blacksmith. I should like it very much. Then, my dear Handel, said he, turning round as the door opened, here is the dinner, and I must beg of you to take the top of the table, because the dinner is of your providing. This I would not hear of, so he took the top and I faced him. It was a nice little dinner, seemed to me then a very Lord Mayor's feast, and it acquired additional relish from being eaten under those independent circumstances with no old people by, and with London all around us. This again was heightened by a certain gypsy character that set the banquet off, for while the table was, as Mr. Pumblechook might have said, the lap of luxury, being entirely furnished forth from the coffee-house, the circumjacent region of sitting room was of a comparatively pastoralist and shifty character, imposing on the waiter the wandering habits of putting the covers on the floor, where he fell over them, the melted butter in the armchair, the bread on the bookshelves, the cheese in the coal scuttle, and the boiled fowl into my bed in the next room, where I found much of its parsley and butter in a state of congelation when I retired for the night. All this made the feast delightful, and when the waiter was not there to watch me, my pleasure was without alloy. We had made some progress in the dinner when I reminded Herbert of his promise to tell me about Miss Havisham. "True," he replied. "I'll redeem it at once. Let me introduce the topic, Handel, by mentioning that in London it is not the custom to put the knife in the mouth for fear of accidents, and that while the fork is reserved for that use, it is not put further in than necessary. It is scarcely worth mentioning, only it's as well to do as other people do. Also, the spoon is not generally used overhand, but under. This has two advantages. You get at your mouth better, which after all is the object, and you save a good deal of the attitude of opening oysters on the part of the right elbow." He offered these friendly suggestions in such a lively way that we both laughed, and I scarcely blushed. "Now," he pursued, "concerning Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham, you must know, was a spoiled child. Her mother died when she was a baby, and her father denied her nothing. Her father was a country gentleman down in your part of the world, and was a brewer. I don't know why it should be a crack thing to be a brewer, but it is indisputable that while you cannot possibly be genteel and bake, you may be as genteel as never was and brew. You see it every day. Yet a gentleman may not keep a public house, may he?" said I. "Not on any account," returned Herbert, "but a public house may keep a gentleman. Well, Mr. Havisham was very rich and very proud. So was his daughter." "Miss Havisham was an only child," I hazarded. "Stop a moment. I am coming to that. No, she was not an only child. She had a half-brother. Her father privately married again. His cook, I rather think. I thought he was proud," said I. "My good Handel, so he was. He married his second wife privately because he was proud, and in course of time she died. When she was dead, I apprehend he first told his daughter what he had done, and then the son became a part of the family, residing in the house you are acquainted with. As the son grew a young man, he turned out riotous, extravagant, undutiful, altogether bad. At last his father disinherited him, but he softened when he was dying and left him well off, though not nearly so well off as Miss Havisham. Take another glass of wine, and excuse my mentioning that society as a body does not expect one to be so strictly conscientious in emptying one's glass as to turn it bottom upwards with the rim on one's nose." I had been doing this in an excess of attention to his recital. I thanked him and apologized. He said, "Not at all," and resumed. "Miss Havisham was now an heiress, and you may suppose was looked after as a great match. Her half-brother had now ample means again, but what with debts and what with new madness wasted them most fearfully again. There were stronger differences between him and her than there had been between him and his father, and it is suspected that he cherished a deep and mortal grudge against her, as having influenced the father's anger. Now, I come to the cruel part of the story, merely breaking off, my dear Handel, to remark that a dinner napkin will not go into a tumbler. Why I was trying to pack mine into my tumbler, I am wholly unable to say. I only know that I found myself, with a perseverance worthy of a much better cause, making the most strenuous exertions to compress it within those limits. Again I thanked him and apologized, and again he said in the cheerfulest manner, "Not at all, I am sure," and resumed, "There appeared upon the scene, say at the races or the public balls or anywhere else you like, a certain man who made love to Miss Havisham. I never saw him, for this happened 25 years ago, before you and I were, Handel, but I have heard my father mention that he was a showy man, and the kind of man for the purpose, but that he was not to be, without ignorance or prejudice, mistaken for a gentleman. My father most strongly asseverates, because it is a principle of his that no man who was not a true gentleman at heart ever was, since the world began, a true gentleman in manner. He says no varnish can hide the grain of the wood, and that the more varnish you put on, the more the grain will express itself. Well, this man pursued Miss Havisham closely, and professed to be devoted to her. I believe she had not shown much susceptibility up to that time, but all the susceptibility she possessed certainly came out then, and she passionately loved him. There is no doubt that she perfectly idolized him. He practiced on her affection in that systematic way, that he got great sums of money from her, and he induced her to buy her brother out of a share in the brewery, which had been weakly left him by his father at an immense price, on the plea that when he was her husband he must hold and manage it all. Your guardian was not at that time in Miss Havisham's counsels, and she was too haughty and too much in love to be advised by anyone. Her relations were poor and scheming. With the exception of my father, he was poor enough, but not time, serving or jealous. The only independent one among them, he warned her that she was doing too much for this man, and was placing herself too unreservedly in his power. She took the first opportunity of angrily ordering my father out of the house, in his presence, and my father has never seen her since. I thought of her having said, "Matthew will come and see me at last when I am laid dead upon that table," and I asked Herbert whether his father was so inveterate against her. "It's not that," said he, but she charged him, in the presence of her intended husband, with being disappointed in the hope of fawning upon her for his own advancement, and if he were to go to her now it would look true, even to him, and even to her, to return to the man and make an end of him. The marriage day was fixed. The wedding dresses were bought. The wedding tour was planned out. The wedding guests were invited. The day came, but not the bridegroom. He wrote her a letter, which she received. I struck in, when she was dressing for her marriage, at 20 minutes to 9. "At the hour and minute," said Herbert, nodding, at which she afterwards stopped all the clocks. What was in it further than that it most heartlessly broke the marriage off? I can't tell you because I don't know. When she recovered from a bad illness that she had, she laid the whole place waste, as you have seen it, and she has never since looked upon the light of day. "Is that all the story?" I asked, after considering it. "All I know of it, and indeed I only know so much, through piecing it out for myself, for my father always avoids it, and even when Miss Havisham invited me to go there, told me no more of it than it was absolutely requisite I should understand. But I have forgotten one thing. It has been supposed that the man to whom she gave her misplaced confidence acted throughout in concert with her half-brother, that it was a conspiracy between them, and that they shared the profits. I wonder he didn't marry her and get all the property," said I. "He may have been married already, and her cruel mortification may have been a part of her half-brother's scheme," said Herbert. "Mind, I don't know that." "What became of the two men?" I asked, after again considering the subject. "They fell into deeper shame and degradation, if there can be deeper, and ruin. Are they alive now?" "I don't know. You said just now that Estella was not related to Miss Havisham, but adopted, when adopted." Herbert shrugged his shoulders. "There has always been an Estella since I have heard of a Miss Havisham. I know no more. And now, Handel," said he, finally throwing off the story as it were, "there is a perfectly open understanding between us. All that I know about Miss Havisham, you know, and all that I know," I retorted, "you know. I fully believe it. So there can be no competition or perplexity between you and me. And as to the condition on which you hold your advancement in life, namely, that you are not to inquire or discuss to whom you owe it, you may be very sure that it will never be encroached upon, or even approached, by me, or by anyone belonging to me." In truth, he said this with so much delicacy that I felt the subject done with, even though I should be under his father's roof for years and years to come. Yet he said it with so much meaning, too, that I felt he as perfectly understood Miss Havisham to be my benefactress. As I understood the fact myself, it had not occurred to me before that he had led up to the theme for the purpose of clearing it out of our way. But we were so much the lighter and easier for having broached it that I now perceived this to be the case. We were very gay and sociable, and I asked him, in the course of conversation, what he was. He replied, "A capitalist, an insurer of ships." I suppose he saw me glancing about the room in search of some tokens of shipping, or capital, for he added, "in the city." I had grand ideas of the wealth and importance of insurers of ships in the city, and I began to think with awe of having laid a young insurer on his back, blackened his enterprising eye, and cut his responsible head open. But again there came upon me, for my relief, that odd impression that Herbert Pocket would never be very successful or rich. I shall not rest satisfied with merely employing my capital in insuring ships. I shall buy up some good life assurance shares and cut into the direction. I shall also do a little in the mining way. None of these things will interfere with my chartering a few thousand tons on my own account. I think I shall trade, said he, leaning back in his chair, to the East Indies for silks, shawls, spices, dyes, drugs, and precious woods. It's an interesting trade, And the profits are large, said I. Tremendous, said he. I wavered again, and began to think here were greater expectations than my own. I think I shall trade also, said he, putting his thumbs in his waistcoat pockets, to the West Indies for sugar, tobacco, and rum, also to Ceylon, especially for elephants' tusks. You will want a good many ships, said I. A perfect fleet, said he. Quite overpowered by the magnificence of these transactions, I asked him where the ships he insured mostly traded to at present. I haven't begun insuring yet, he replied. I am looking about me, somehow. That pursuit seemed more in keeping with Barnard's Inn, I said, in a tone of conviction. Ah, yes, I am in a counting house, and looking about me. Is a counting house profitable? I asked. Do you mean to the young fellow who's in it? He asked. In reply, yes, to you. Why, no, not to me. He said this with the air of one carefully reckoning up and striking a balance. Not directly profitable. That is, it doesn't pay me anything, and I have to keep myself. This certainly had not a profitable appearance, and I shook my head as if I would imply that it would be difficult to lay by much accumulative capital from such a source of income. But the thing is, said Herbert Pocket, that you look about you. That's the grand thing. You are in a counting house, you know, and you look about you. It struck me as a singular implication that you couldn't be out of a counting house, you know, and look about you. But I silently deferred to his experience. Then the time comes, said Herbert, when you see your opening, and you go in, and you swoop upon it, and you make your capital, and then there you are. When you have once made your capital, you have nothing to do but employ it. This was very like his way of conducting that encounter in the garden, very like. His manner of bearing his poverty, too, exactly corresponded to his manner of bearing that defeat. It seemed to me that he took all blows and buffets now with just the same air as he had taken mine then. It was evident that he had nothing around him but the simplest necessaries, for everything that I remarked upon turned out to have been sent in on my account from the coffee house or somewhere else. Yet, having already made his fortune in his own mind, he was so unassuming with it that I felt quite grateful to him for not being puffed up. It was a pleasant addition to his naturally pleasant ways, and we got on famously. In the evening we went out for a walk in the streets, and went half-price to the theatre, and next day we went to church at Westminster Abbey, and in the afternoon we walked in the parks, and I wondered who shod all the horses there, and wished Joe did. On a moderate computation, it was many months, that Sunday, since I had left Joe and Biddy. The space interposed between myself and them partook of that expansion, and our marshes were any distance off. That I could have been at our old church in my old church, going close on the very last Sunday that ever was, seemed a combination of impossibilities, geographical and social, solar and lunar. Yet in the London streets so crowded with people and so brilliantly lighted in the dusk of evening, there were depressing hints of reproaches for that I had put the poor old kitchen at home so far away. And in the dead of night, the footsteps of some incapable impostor of a porter mooning about Barnard's Inn, under pretense of watching it, fell hollow on my heart. On the Monday morning at 9:15, Herbert went to the counting house to report himself, to look about him too, I suppose, and I bore him company. He was to come away in an hour or two to attend me to Hammersmith, and I was to wait about for him. It appeared to me that the eggs from which young insurers were hatched were incubated in dust and heat, like the eggs of ostriches, judging from the places to which those incipient giants repaired on a Monday morning. Nor did the counting house where Herbert assisted show in my eyes as at all a good observatory, being a back second floor up a yard, of a grimy presence in all particulars, and with a look into another back second floor rather than a look out. I waited about until it was noon, and I went upon 'Change, and I saw fluey men sitting there under the bills about shipping, whom I took to be great merchants, though I couldn't understand why they should all be out of spirits. When Herbert came, we went and had lunch at a celebrated house which I then quite venerated, but now believed to have been the most abject superstition in Europe, and where I could not help noticing, even then, that there was much more gravy on the tablecloths and knives and waiters' clothes than in the steaks. This collation disposed of at a moderate price, considering the grease which was not charged for, we went back to Barnard's Inn and got my little portmanteau, and then took coach for Hammersmith. We arrived there at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and had very little way to walk to Mr. Pocket's house. Lifting the latch of a gate, we passed direct into a little garden overlooking the river, where Mr. Pocket's children were playing about. And unless I deceive myself on a point where my interests or prepossessions are certainly not concerned, I saw that Mr. and Mrs. Pocket's children were not growing up or being brought up, but were tumbling up. Mrs. Pocket was sitting on a garden chair under a tree reading, with her legs upon another garden chair, and Mrs. Pocket's two nurse maids were looking about them while the children played. "Mamma," said Herbert, "this is young Mr. Pip," upon which Mrs. Pocket received me with an appearance of amiable dignity. "Master Alick and Miss Jane," cried one of the nurses to two of the children, "if you go a-bouncing up against them bushes you'll fall over into the river and be drownded. And what'll your pa say then?" At the same time this nurse picked up Mrs. Pocket's handkerchief and said, "If that don't make 6 times you've dropped it, Mum." Upon which Mrs. Pocket laughed and said, "Thank you, Flopson," and settling herself in one chair only, resumed her book. Her countenance immediately assumed a knitted and intent expression as if she had been reading for a week, but before she could have read half a dozen lines, she fixed her eyes upon me and said, "I hope your mamma is quite well." This unexpected inquiry put me into such a difficulty that I began saying in the absurdest way that if there had been any such person I had no doubt she would have been quite well and would have been very much obliged and would have sent her compliments, when the nurse came to my rescue. "Well," she cried, picking up the pocket handkerchief, "if that don't make 7 times, what are you a-doing of this afternoon, Mum?" Mrs. Pocket received her property, at first with a look of unutterable surprise as if she had never seen it before, and then with a laugh of recognition and said, "Thank you, Flopson," and forgot me, and went on reading. I found, now I had leisure to count them, that there were no fewer than 6 little pockets present, in various stages of tumbling up. I had scarcely arrived at the total when a 7th was heard, as in the region of air, wailing dolefully. "If there ain't baby," said Flopson, appearing to think it most surprising, "make haste up, Millers." Millers, who was the other nurse, retired into the house, and by degrees the child's wailing was hushed and stopped, as if it were a young ventriloquist with something in its mouth. Mrs. Pocket read all the time, and I was curious to know what the book could be. We were waiting, I supposed, for Mr. Pocket to come out to us. At any rate, we waited there, and so I had an opportunity of observing the remarkable family phenomenon that whenever any of the children strayed near Mrs. Pocket in their play, they always tripped themselves up and tumbled over her, always very much to her momentary astonishment and their own more enduring lamentation. I was at a loss to account for this surprising circumstance, and could not help giving my mind to speculations about it, until by and by Millers came down with the baby, which baby was handed to Flopson, which Flopson was handing it to Mrs. Pocket, when she too went fairly head foremost over Mrs. Pocket, baby and all, and was caught by Herbert and myself. "Gracious me, Flopson," said Mrs. Pocket, looking off her book for a moment, "everybody's tumbling." "Gracious you, indeed, Mum," returned Flopson, very red in the face. "What have you got there?" "I got here, Flopson," asked Mrs. Pocket. "Why, if it ain't your footstool," cried Flopson, "and if you keep it under your skirts like that, who's to help tumbling? Here, take the baby, Mum, and give me your book." Pocket acted on the advice, and inexpertly danced the infant a little in her lap, while the other children played about it. This had lasted but a very short time, when Mrs. Pocket issued summary orders that they were all to be taken into the house for a nap. Thus I made the second discovery on that first occasion, that the nurture of the little Pockets consisted of alternately tumbling up and lying down. Under these circumstances, when Flopson and Millers had got the children into the house like a little flock of sheep, and Mr. Pocket came out of it to make my acquaintance, I was not much surprised to find that Mr. Pocket was a gentleman with a rather perplexed expression of face, and with his very gray hair disordered on his head, as if he didn't quite see his way to putting anything straight. Chapter 23. Mr. Pocket said he was glad to see me, and he hoped I was not sorry to see him, for I really am not, he added with his son's smile. An alarming personage. He was a young-looking man, in spite of his perplexities and his very gray hair, and his manner seemed quite natural. I use the word natural in the sense of its being unaffected. There was something comic in his distraught way, as though it would have been downright ludicrous but for his own perception that it was very near being so. When he had talked with me a little, he said to Mrs. Pocket, with a rather anxious contraction of his eyebrows, which were black and handsome, "Belinda, "I hope you have welcomed Mr. Pip," and she looked up from her book and said yes. She then smiled upon me in an absent state of mind and asked me if I liked the taste of orange flower water, as the question had no bearing, near or remote, on any foregone or subsequent transaction. I consider it to have been thrown out, like her previous approaches in general conversational condescension. I found out within a few hours, and may mention at once, that Mrs. Pocket was the only daughter of a certain quite accidental deceased knight, who had invented for himself a conviction that his deceased father would have been made a baronet, but for somebody's determined opposition arising out of entirely personal motives. I forget whose, if I ever knew. The sovereigns, the prime ministers, the lord chancellors, the archbishop of Canterbury's, anybody's, and had tacked himself on to the nobles of the earth in right of this quite supposititious fact. I believe he had been knighted himself for storming the English grammar, at the point of the pen, in a desperate address engrossed on vellum, on the occasion of the laying of the first stone of some building or other, and for handing some royal personage either the trowel or the mortar. Be that as it may, he had directed Mrs. Pocket to be brought up from her cradle, as one who in the nature of things must marry a title, and who was to be guarded from the acquisition of plebeian domestic knowledge. So successful a watch and ward had been established over the young lady by this judicious parent, that she had grown up highly ornamental, but perfectly helpless and useless. With her character thus happily formed in the first bloom of her youth, she had encountered Mr. Pocket, who was also in the first bloom of youth, and not quite decided whether to mount to the woolsack or to roof himself in with a mitre. As his doing the one or the other was a mere question of time, he and Mrs. Pocket had taken time by the forelock, when, to judge from its length, it would seem to have wanted cutting, and had married without the knowledge of the judicious parent. The judicious parent, having nothing to bestow or withhold but his blessing, had handsomely settled the dower upon them after a short struggle, and had informed Mr. Pocket that his wife was a treasure for a prince. Mr. Pocket had invested the prince's treasure in the ways of the world ever since, and it was supposed to have brought him in but indifferent interest. Still, Mrs. Pocket was in general the object of a queer sort of respectful pity, because she had not married a title, while Mr. Pocket was the object of a queer sort of forgiving reproach, because he had never got one. Mr. Pocket took me into the house and showed me my room, which was a pleasant one, and so furnished as that I could use it with comfort for my own private sitting room. He then knocked at the doors of two other similar rooms, and introduced me to their occupants by name Drummle and Startop. Drummle, an old-looking young man of a heavy order of architecture, was whistling. Startop, younger in years and appearance, was reading and holding his head, as if he thought himself in danger of exploding it with too strong a charge of knowledge. Both Mr. and Mrs. Pocket had such a noticeable air of being in somebody else's hands that I wondered who really was in possession of the house and let them live there, until I found this unknown power to be the servants. It was a smooth way of going on, perhaps, in respect of saving trouble, but it had the appearance of being expensive, for the servants felt it a duty they owed to themselves to be nice in their eating and drinking, and to keep a deal of company downstairs. They allowed a very liberal table to Mr. and Mrs. Pocket, yet it always appeared to me that by far the best part of the house to have boarded in would have been the kitchen, always supposing the boarder capable of self-defense. For, before I had been there a week, a neighboring lady with whom the family were personally unacquainted wrote in to say that she had seen Miller slapping the baby. This greatly distressed Mrs. Pocket, who burst into tears on receiving the note, and said that it was an extraordinary thing that the neighbors couldn't mind their own business. By degrees I learnt, and chiefly from Herbert, that Mr. Pocket had been educated at Harrow and at Cambridge, where he had distinguished himself, but that when he had had the happiness of marrying Mrs. Pocket very early in life, he had impaired his prospects and taken up the calling of a grinder, after grinding a number of dull blades, of whom it was remarkable that their fathers, when influential, were always going to help him to preferment, but always forgot to do it when the blades had left the grindstone. He had wearied of that poor work and had come to London. Here, after gradually failing in loftier hopes, he had read with divers who had lacked opportunities or neglected them, and had refurbished divers others for special occasions, and had turned his acquirements to the account of literary compilation and correction, and on such means, added to some very moderate private resources, still maintained the house I saw. Mr. and Mrs. Pocket had a toady neighbor, a widow lady of that highly sympathetic nature that she agreed with everybody, blessed everybody, and shed smiles and tears on everybody. According to circumstances, this lady's name was Mrs. Coiler, and I had the honor of taking her down to dinner on the day of my installation. She gave me to understand on the stairs that it was a blow to dear Mrs. Pocket that dear Mr. Pocket should be under the necessity of receiving gentlemen to read with him. That did not extend to me, she told me in a gush of love and confidence. At that time, I had known her something less than 5 minutes. If they were all like me, it would be quite another thing. But dear Mrs. Pocket, said Mrs. Coiler, after her early disappointment, not that dear Mr. Pocket was to blame in that requires so much luxury and elegance. Yes, ma'am, I said to stop her, for I was afraid she was going to cry. And she is of so aristocratic a disposition. Yes, ma'am. I said again with the same object as before, that it is hard, said Mrs. Coiler, to have dear Mr. Pocket's time and attention diverted from dear Mrs. Pocket. I could not help thinking that it might be harder if the butcher's time and attention were diverted from dear Mrs. Pocket. But I said nothing, and indeed had enough to do in keeping a bashful watch upon my company manners. It came to my knowledge, through what passed between Mrs. Pocket and Drummle while I was attentive to my knife and fork, spoon, glasses, and other instruments of self-destruction, that Drummle, whose Christian name was Bentley, was actually the next heir, but one to a baronetcy. It further appeared that the book I had seen Mrs. Pocket reading in the garden was all about titles, and that she knew the exact date at which her grandpapa would have come into the book, if he ever had come at all. Drummle didn't say much, but in his limited way, he struck me as a sulky kind of fellow. He spoke as one of the elect, and recognized Mrs. Pocket as a woman and a sister. No one but themselves and Mrs. Coiler, the toady neighbor, showed any interest in this part of the conversation, and it appeared to me that it was painful to Herbert. But it promised to last a long time when the page came in with the announcement of a domestic affliction. It was, in effect, that the cook had mislaid the beef. To my unutterable amazement, I now for the first time saw Mr. Pocket relieve his mind by going through a performance that struck me as very extraordinary, but which made no impression on anybody else, and with which I soon became as familiar as the rest. He laid down the carving knife and fork, being engaged in carving at the moment, put his 2 hands into his disturbed hair, and appeared to make an extraordinary effort to lift himself up by it. When he had done this, and had not lifted himself up at all, he quietly went on with what he was about. Mrs. Coiler then changed the subject and began to flatter me. I liked it for a few moments, but she flattered me so very grossly that the pleasure was soon over. She had a serpentine way of coming close at me when she pretended to be vitally interested in the friends and localities I had left, which was altogether snaky and fork-tongued, and when she made an occasional bounce upon Startop, who said very little to her, or upon Drummle, who said less. I rather envied them for being on the opposite side of the table. After dinner the children were introduced, and Mrs. Coiler made admiring comments on their eyes, noses, and legs, a sagacious way of improving their minds. There were 4 little girls and 2 little boys, besides the baby who might have been either, and the baby's next successor who was as yet neither. They were brought in by Flopson and Millers, much as though those 2 non-commissioned officers had been recruiting somewhere for children and had enlisted these, while Mrs. Pocket looked at the young nobles that ought to have been as if she rather thought she had had the pleasure of inspecting them before, but didn't quite know what to make of them. "Here, give me your fork, Mum, and take the baby," said Flopson. "Don't take it that way, or you'll get its head under the table." Thus advised, Mrs. Pocket took it the other way and got its head upon the table, which was announced to all present by a prodigious concussion. Dear, give it me back, Mum," said Flopson, "and Miss Jane, come and dance to Baby Do." One of the little girls, a mere mite who seemed to have prematurely taken upon herself some charge of the others, stepped out of her place by me and danced to and from the baby until it left off crying, and laughed. Then all the children laughed, and Mr. Pocket, who in the meantime had twice endeavored to lift himself up by the hair, laughed, and we all laughed and were glad. Flopson, by dint of doubling the baby at the joints like a Dutch doll, then got it safely into Mrs. Pocket's lap and gave it the nutcrackers to play with, at the same time recommending Mrs. Pocket to take notice that the handles of that instrument were not likely to agree with its eyes, and sharply charging Miss Jane to look after the same. Then the 2 nurses left the room and had a lively scuffle on the staircase with a dissipated page who had waited at dinner and who had clearly lost half his buttons at the gaming table. I was made very uneasy in my mind by Mrs. Pocket's falling into a discussion with Drummle respecting 2 baronetcies while she ate a sliced orange steeped in sugar and wine, and forgetting all about the baby on her lap, who did most appalling things with the nutcrackers. At length little Jane, perceiving its young brains to be imperiled, softly left her place, and with many small artifices coaxed the dangerous weapon away. Mrs. Pocket, finishing her orange at about the same time, and not approving of this, said to Jane, "You naughty child, how dare you? Go and sit down this instant." "Mamma dear," lisped the little girl, "baby ood have put hith eyeth out." "How dare you tell me so?" retorted Mrs. Pocket. "Go and sit down in your chair this moment." Mrs. Pocket's dignity was so crushing that I felt quite abashed, as if I myself had done something to rouse it. "Belinda," remonstrated Mr. Pocket from the other end of the table, "how can you be so unreasonable? Jane only interfered for the protection of baby." "I will not allow anybody to interfere," said Mrs. Pocket. "I am surprised, Matthew, that you should expose me to the affront of interference." "Good God!" cried Mr. Pocket, in an outbreak of desolate desperation. "Are infants to be nut-crackered into their tombs, and is nobody to save them?" "I will not be interfered with by Jane," said Mrs. Pocket, with a majestic glance at that innocent little offender. "I hope I know my poor grandpapa's position, Jane, indeed." Mr. Pocket got his hands in his hair again, and this time really did lift himself some inches out of his chair. "Hear this," he helplessly exclaimed to the elements. "Babies are to be nut-crackered dead for people's poor grandpapa's positions." Then he let himself down again and became silent. We all looked awkwardly at the tablecloth while this was going on. A pause succeeded, during which the honest and irrepressible baby made a series of leaps and crows at little Jane, who appeared to me to be the only member of the family, irrespective of servants, with whom it had any decided acquaintance. "Mr. Drummle," said Mrs. Pocket, "will you ring for Flopson? Jane, you undutiful little thing, go and lie down. Now, baby darling, come with ma." The baby was the soul of honor, and protested with all its might. It doubled itself up the wrong way over Mrs. Pocket's arm, exhibited a pair of knitted shoes and dimpled ankles to the company in lieu of its soft face, and was carried out in the highest state of mutiny. And it gained its point after all, for I saw it through the window within a few minutes, being nursed by little Jane. It happened that the other 5 children were left behind at the dinner table, through Flopson's having some private engagement, and there not being anybody else's business. I thus became aware of the mutual relations between them and Mr. Pocket, which were exemplified in the following manner. Mr. Pocket, with the normal perplexity of his face heightened and his hair rumpled, looked at them for some minutes as if he couldn't make out how they came to be boarding and lodging in that establishment, and why they hadn't been billeted by nature on somebody else. Then, in a distant missionary way, he asked them certain questions, as why little Joe had that hole in his frill, who said Pa Flopson was going to mend it when she had time, and how little Fanny came by that Whitlow, who said Pa Millers was going to poultice it when she didn't forget. Then he melted into parental tenderness and gave them a shilling apiece and told them to go and play. And then as they went out, with one very strong effort to lift himself up by the hair, he dismissed the hopeless subject. In the evening there was rowing on the river, as Drummle and Startup had each a boat. I resolved to set up mine and to cut them both out. I was pretty good at most exercises in which country boys are adepts, but as I was conscious of wanting elegance of style for the Thames, not to say for other waters, I at once engaged to place myself under the tuition of the winner of a prize wherry who plied at our stairs, and to whom I was introduced by my new allies. This practical authority confused me very much by saying I had the arm of a blacksmith. If he could have known how nearly the compliment lost him his pupil, I doubt if he would have paid it. There was a supper tray after we got home at night, and I think we should all have enjoyed ourselves, but for a rather disagreeable domestic occurrence. Mr. Pocket was in good spirits when a housemaid came in and said, "If you please, sir, I should wish to speak to you." "Speak to your master," said Mrs. Pocket, whose dignity was roused again. "How can you think of such a thing? Go and speak to Flopson, or speak to me at some other time." "Begging your pardon, ma'am," returned the housemaid, "I should wish to speak at once, and to speak to master." Hereupon Mr. Pocket went out of the room, and we made the best of ourselves until he came back. "This is a pretty thing, Belinda," said Mr. Pocket, returning with a countenance expressive of grief and despair. "Here's the cook lying insensibly drunk on the kitchen floor, with a large bundle of fresh butter made up in the cupboard ready to sell for grease." Mrs. Pocket instantly showed much amiable emotion, and said, This is that odious Sophia's doing." "What do you mean, Belinda?" demanded Mr. Pocket. "Sophia has told you," said Mrs. Pocket. "Did I not see her with my own eyes and hear her with my own ears come into the room just now and ask to speak to you?" "But has she not taken me downstairs, Belinda," returned Mr. Pocket, "and shown me the woman and the bundle too?" "And do you defend her, Matthew?" said Mrs. Pocket, "for making mischief?" Mr. Pocket uttered a dismal groan. "Am I, Grandpapa's granddaughter, to be nothing in the house?" said Mrs. Pocket. "Besides, the cook has always been a very nice, respectful woman, and said in the most natural manner when she came to look after the situation that she felt I was born to be a duchess." There was a sofa where Mr. Pocket stood, and he dropped upon it in the attitude of the dying gladiator. Still in that attitude, he said with a hollow voice, "Good night, Mr. Pip." When I deemed it advisable to go to bed and leave him,